Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. It's about 2 minutes to the start of the broadcast on Patent Landscapes by Tony Trippi. Please give us a minute as we allow everyone to join and we'll get started. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's session on Patent Landscapes. My name is Ken Ropke from Mindsoft. We are excited today to be joined by Tony Trippi from Pat Informatics to learn how to get the most value from Patent Landscapes. Tony is the managing director of Pat Informatics, an advisory firm specializing in patent analytics and landscaping to support decision making. Tony recently wrote the guidelines for the preparation of patent landscape reports for the World Intellectual Property Organization. So while today's landscape, on cybersecurity, the best practices that Tony's going to be reviewing today can certainly be applied to any landscape. And with that, I'll introduce Tony Trippi from Pat Informatics.
All right, hello everyone, and thank you, Ken, for that kind introduction. It's a real pleasure to be here today with everyone. And as Ken said, yes, cybersecurity is the case study, but it's these principles, these ideas can be applied to just about any topic that you like. And we're actually going to start by doing that a little bit, talking about how to put something like this together. But in addition to a landscape, the landscape is only good for about a week. And after that, there's new records, there's new data, there's new things going on. And so it's just as important to think about how it is that you're going to keep you and your clients up to date as it is putting together the initial landscape in the first place. So we're going to touch on a whole suite of tools that Microsoft provides that enable you to empower your team to keep up to date on everything that might be going on in a particular topic area that you're interested in. So you can see here just a couple of slides. Thought it would be interesting to talk a little bit about. We started looking at this 2 years ago, and 2 years ago these were a couple of the headlines that we talked about. Nothing particularly earth-shattering. China is filing patents at an unprecedented level. At that point, they weren't quite the world leader yet, but they had just begun to edge out. You'll notice we're going to find out that gap is widening. IBM had the largest collection of cybersecurity patents, followed by Microsoft. But Intel had the second highest number of families starting in prior to year 2016. And then went on here to talk about how many of the subcategories that IBM was number one in, some more about Chinese companies, particularly Tencent, Huawei, Alibaba, Lenovo, ZTE, Xiaomi, and a little bit about some details on the wireless area with Qualcomm, and so on. And now we come here now to the end of 2020, and the number of new families published in cybersecurity jumped by 17% between 2018 and 2019. It is projected to increase by another 18% between 2019 and 2020. So it continues to be amazing growth, more than double-digit growth in this particular area. China has now passed the U.S. Published, they first passed them in 2017. They're projected to have 27% more families in this area than the U.S. for 2020. Huawei and Samsung have now leaped into 4th and 5th place overall, and 2nd and 3rd for 2020. So they're absolutely the top fastest growing companies in the last 5 years. Samsung, of course, is Korean, but it talks about the importance of this to the Asian region. And this last line is a bit of a plug. This has been really exciting to work on because back in 2017, 2018, when we were working on this, it was a very different pat base that was being worked with. And for instance, it really was very, very difficult to work with anything over 100,000 families. And even getting to 100,000 was a little bit of a slog. It took a little bit of time. Analytics took a little while to work. And it just, you had to be a little bit patient, which it wasn't bad, but it's pretty amazing what they've managed to accomplish in the last few years. And so I'm going to bring us right on over to PatBase now. And so the first question when you're doing something like this is, well, Tony, how do you build a collection like this in the first place? Cybersecurity is a big area. There's a lot going on, and what is it that you do in order to go ahead and put something like this together? Well, to be perfectly honest with you, for instance, I might just start with something like TI equals cybersecurity. Okay, and give it a few seconds, and all right, there's 151 records. That doesn't seem like very much, but we're not looking for very much at this point. I come here to view, and this will take just a few seconds, but not terribly long. And okay, hey, wait a second. I can see some words in here that maybe I should be using as opposed to cybersecurity. And whoa, what's this now? There's a bunch of these codes here that I can be using. And so, for instance, if I just put my, this is a communication protocol, 804L29, 804.12.26. There's a lot of different codes in here that I could be using to go ahead and put together this landscape. I come down here to the next one, and I see some more codes that I might be able to use, and so on. And so I just start by exploring the area, thinking about keywords, thinking about codes, thinking about ways that I'm going to work with this. And in particular, here's one that I found here, that security arrangements for protecting computers. Well, G06F21 is going to end up actually being the backbone of this particular query. But there's a few others that I tossed in here as well. And so if we come back here to our history, you can see that I've got the SC, which is the supercode, which will capture both IPC and CPC among the other coding systems that are available. And there's my G06F21. And then I've got 804W12, and that's wireless security. 804L9, that's encryption. I've got G06Q2382, which is secure payments. And I've got 804L63, which is network security. And so I've put all of these together, and I've ended up with 426,458 records. And for the sake of looking at this and breaking it down individually, I've also gone ahead and searched them one at a time, so that when I bring this over to analytics, I'll be able to go ahead and talk more about each one of these individual segments and make comparisons. Because quite frankly, that's one of the things I think is most valuable in a patent landscape report. Once you've built the collection, you need to be able to provide some insights onto that collection. It's more than just, well, who are the top companies? What are the publication trends? I mean, these are all very, very vital, but when it gets right down to it, I'm always looking for interesting categories, business relevant categories that I can use to make meaningful comparisons between companies, and in time again to say, well, okay, this category is moving faster than this one, or this company has got an interesting mix of these categories. So there's lots of interesting facets, lots of additional insight that you can glean by being able to create these subcategories. And now in patent-based analytics version 3, it's really pretty straightforward and quite fast to go ahead and build that sort of a situation where I can compare more than one collection at a time and see how they relate to one another. But we're going to get to that in just a second. While we're still here in PatBase, there's a few things that I want to show people. And the first of those is actually PatKM. And we talked about the idea that in analytics, it's only as good as the last time you ran the search. And it is really nice in PAT-based analytics that it'll automatically update with new records. So that's really interesting. But you know what? Not everybody wants to work with that sort of a dashboard. When we're working with attorneys or we're working with the research scientists, they don't necessarily want to be working with that kind of an analytics session isn't all that easy to search. An analytics session isn't necessarily all that easy to find records that have a particular let's just say fingerprint, that have been tagged, for instance, that have been put into categories. And that's where PatKM comes in. And I'm going to show you a mocked up example here of a version of a technology tree that was put together in PatKM. But then I'm also going to tell you a little bit about what I do for my clients. I have several clients that are PAT-based users, and I work with them very, very closely to help them build their trees and to populate their trees, even by helping them create their alerts, and even in certain circumstances, helping them actually manage the weekly inflow and the actual tagging, and then they disseminate that to their customers. And so let's take a quick look over here at PatKM. We're going to look at the entire collection of PAT-based tools, Microsoft tools, during this session. And so you can see here up on my bar, we're going to get to analytics, we're going to get to IP share, we're going to get to Pat Docs, we're going to look at the whole thing. And so here in this particular case, you can see that I've built this tree, and it's got all sorts of really interesting nuggets that are associated with, for instance, with encryption. One of my favorites, quantum cryptography. The quantum field is something that I've done a lot of work in, and so that's in there now. And we've got the wireless security and various aspects of wireless security, and we've got network security and all of those, and different types of secure payment. And then I've also added companies here so that I can, identify which companies I might be interested in quickly. And this is primarily not so much for the information professional who knows how to do their searching themselves, but if you've got a team of people working and you want to set it up for them, it's a little bit like a basketball player. You're setting a pick for somebody, you're giving somebody an easy layup, and that's what you're doing by setting all of this up ahead of time. And then when your researchers come in, they go, oh, sure, great. I'll just click on IBM in this particular tree branch, and and I'm good to go. I don't need to worry about codes. I don't need to worry about search hedges. I can just go ahead and build this, and then they can take advantage of it. And then we've got some categories down here too, and this is something that some people like to do. You can put in notes, you can put in a category. For instance, this is really core, this is related or tangential. And of course, you're going to want to work with your patent attorneys to make sure that when you go ahead and put these type of things in, that they're copacetic with the names that you're using, and that you're not crossing any lines as far as giving too much away about particular documents. So categories here can be a tiny bit controversial, but at least one of my clients really likes it, and the primary shareholder or the stockholder is our attorneys, and so they felt comfortable using similar type of words. And so in this particular case, if I go ahead and just run this search, for instance, it comes up with 3 records in this particular case. Again, this is just for an example. But one of the things I really, really love, and I use this all the time, is this idea that you notice here that I've got everything highlighted. And this highlighting feature is really powerful, really, really useful. And just to take a second to talk about that, if I bring up this window here, you can see that here under the advanced highlighting, I've gone through and I've said, hey, cryptography, security, wireless, quantum, network, payment systems, including blockchain, hash keys, authentication, identification, verification, fraud or malicious malware attacks, so on, privacy. I've got all these bases covered about different things that I might want to look for when I'm applying tags, for instance, or I'm trying to decide how important a record might be as I'm going through it. And so let me go ahead and close this window, and you can see again the results of what that provides automatically. Anytime that somebody goes to look at one of these records and they've got that highlighting scheme, which you can export, you can share with others. And then you've got all these different, this is one peer node recovery, hash verification. And these were all the different areas that I thought it belonged in, including quantum. And I know that for a variety of reasons, but not the least of which is that, where is it? This is the machine learning code. But the code in here, G06N10, is in here for quantum computing, and so that's why I've tagged this one with the quantum computing code. And then this next one, this is one that I thought was really interesting because this is a little bit of an older record. So this goes back to 2009. And I thought that this was really neat for a couple of different reasons, but mostly because, for instance, I thought I might take a look at the citations involved with this one, because there's actually several in this case. There's 9 backwards ones, there's 17 forward ones, and that gives me an opportunity to come over here and work with the citation browser, and I can go ahead and look at these by assignee, for instance, which I think is pretty spiffy. So give that a second. And here we go. So there's the forward citations. I can see which ones are from Honda, which ones are from IBM, which ones are from Microsoft, NXP, and so on. I mean, right there. I mean, this is taking place almost instantaneously. I'm just, barely having to wait a few seconds, and I can get all of this really interesting information. And then I can also build a tree, and the trees are, of course, really important. So I can be looking at the forwards and the backwards, and all the details of these as I scroll along. And so that's part of what we're talking about here today, is just all of these different tools, all these different pieces of information that are just so readily available at your fingertips as you're working with this particular system. So that was something that I thought was really interesting, the citation viewer that I wanted to talk about. I'm going to talk about the legal information browser as well, but I'm going to do that in one of the other tools. And so let me go back here to my history, and I want to go back to PACAM here for just a minute to talk to you a little bit about, like I said, this is a mock-up, but I've built these for companies. And a lot of times what companies will do is there's this idea of a bill of materials, a bill of technology, companies, and then application. Okay, so if you think about the main types of data, the main types of tags that you might want to create in a tree of this type, those are the ones. Now I've got the technology branches here, and so that's pretty straightforward. But the bill of materials, in cybersecurity, that's not a great example for talking about the bill of materials. But if you happen to work for a consumer packaged good company, or if you're in chemistry, or you're in pharmaceuticals, the materials end up being just as important, if not more important, than the technologies. And so there'll be times that I'll have companies that I'm working with that'll have branches that start with the materials involved, and whether that might be the type of plastics that are used, or it might be raw materials that they might be using for a detergent, or whatever the case might be. You can have branches that are coming off of the main idea that these are about all the materials that we need. And then you've got branches that come off for technology, which is what we've got here. Then you might have a branch that comes off for the application. So I'll use the example of Procter & Gamble, for instance. I worked there some time ago, and they might have had, if they were building something like this, they might have had an application for laundry, and they might have had an application for tissue paper, and for waxes and candles, and at one time they were into pharmaceuticals, at one time they were into food. They're certainly into hair care products and personal hygiene type products, razors, all of those sorts of things. And so you can imagine that as you're building this tree, you're going to want to cover, well, this are the materials that are involved. Here are the technologies that are used on the materials. And then this is the final outcome. This is the form. And then you can also include the companies. And then you can also include, like I said, some sort of an indication of how critical this might be. And by the end of the day, when you're done with tagging all that information, you've got this amazing collection and body of knowledge that's easily and readily searchable by anybody in the company. And so I've been saying for a long time that people get really excited about the analytics. Everybody gets really excited about the pretty pictures, and everybody really wants to talk about, well, show me that map, show me that graph, show me, and those are great, and they're powerful tools. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to how much work have you put in on the back end to make sure that those pictures are meaningful, and perhaps even more importantly still, how is it that somebody's going to be able to come and find something else? Or how is it that somebody is going to be able to dig deeper and not just look at the picture, but to look at the references, look at the actual documents that are associated with that? And for me, that's critical. I mean, all of us, I think that we really find that's critical. The majority of us are information professionals, searchers. That's what we primarily do for our clients, and we do analytics as well. But that analytics is steeped in this deep tradition of being able to work with information in a way that people are going to be able to repeat and understand and be able to glean insight from. And I think that this particular archiving system, this particular tagging system, can be very, very powerful and very, very flexible. And like I said, for the customers that I work with that use this, we get a lot out of it. We find that it works really, really well for what we want to do. All righty. Well, that's enough about PAT-KM. I want to do one more thing, and this is the high wire act. This is the part that gets a little dicey. Actually, let's go ahead and just hit search so that we can get back to history. Okay. Now, we've talked about how fast the system is now, and I think that there's no better way to demonstrate exactly how fast it is than by doing an example. And this is the part where the live demo demon might come up and bite me in the ass, and I certainly hope it won't. But I'm going to go ahead and I am going to edit my search history. Now remember, we're talking about somewhere in the order of 850,000 records here. And so I'm going to edit this a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get rid of this stuff right here. And that's going to get us back to these big queries that, all of them combined, and then each of them individually. And let me ask a question. So how long do people think this is going to take? Go ahead and put it in the chat. I'll give you a second here. And of course, I'm remiss in saying that, of course, we're going to save time for questions at the end, but if there's any burning questions that come up in the meantime, please don't hesitate to ask away. Ken and the other folks from Microsoft are going to be monitoring the chat area and the question area, and I'm happy to take a pause if Ken flags me. Looks like maybe somebody tried to raise their hand, so that might be a good indicator too. So I'm going to give you just a few more seconds, how long this is going to take to run, and then I'm going to run it, and you notice it's going to erase my current history, and it's going to put just this in here. All right, here we go. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, run. Now, did anybody say under 10 seconds? I don't know if anybody said under 10 seconds. I wouldn't have said under 10 seconds. This is 850,000 records. All right, and that's all here. We're back. We've got everything put together just like I had it before, and runs lickety split. So very impressive. This would have been something that I would have had to go get a cup of coffee, maybe even go grab lunch and let this run. But here we are. Anyhow, so it's very impressive. They've done a great job of improving their systems. So let's go ahead now. We're going to spend the next 10 to 15 minutes looking at some of the other tools, and then, like I said, there'll be plenty of time for questions unless people ask along the way. So just for the sake of time, this actually loads very quickly, but I had something in particular that I wanted to show you, and so I went ahead. I could have actually just, of course, come over here and clicked on any one of these and said more, and then just sent it over to Pat-based analytics, or sent it to IP share. There's all sorts of different things that I could do from here. But just to save a little bit of time, I went ahead and I already loaded up the analytics with this. And again, the analytics, anything over 100,000 records would have had a difficult time with. And anything that involved trying to compare a lot of categories also would have had a lot of difficulty and would have taken a lot of time. These load up in 10 to 15 seconds now. They load up very, very quickly. And what I've done here is I went ahead and created a collection that looks at 4 subcategories. There's my computer security subcategory. There's my encryption subcategory. There's my network security subcategory. And there's my wireless security subcategory. And so now I've taken 4 out of the 5 collections that I built and merged together to come to 430,000 records or so. And I've put them together here. So now I can actually look and say, okay, well, here's the US. And the US has the most in computer security, followed by network security. And then they've got encryption third. Now, mind you, I loaded these in the order of how many records there were in each one. And so you can even sort of see that here, that computer security was the largest, followed by encryption, followed by network security, followed by wireless. That was back here too. So 148,000 versus 133,000, and so on. So I loaded them intentionally so that the order that would show up here was in the order. And so you see that for instance, the United States, encryption is the second highest number overall, but for the US, it's number 3. Excuse me, it's number 2, but I see I got that backwards. Network security is number 3 overall, but number 2 overall, number 3 for the United States. Okay, so, and the same thing here with China, where I can look at each of these individually, and then I can start looking at some of those assignees. So here's IBM, here's Microsoft, here's Canon, Fujitsu, NEC. I can start looking at some of the inventors, not unsurprisingly, the majority of them are Chinese. I can start looking at the classification sectors. You had electrical engineering, obviously, in this particular case, but in other examples where it was more diversified, you'd be seeing a lot more in some of these other areas. And then the fields, and then versus live versus dead. The application velocity, which I think is very interesting, and some of the semantic similarities, and then my backward citations by year, by category, the jurisdictions and the citations by year, and the assignees by backwards, and then by forwards. So I've got an amazing amount of information divided up into 4 different categories, all here at my fingertips. And of course, if I want to get into any one of these, I can click on the assignees, for instance, because of course, that's what I talked about. That's one of the things that I care a great deal about generally. And so this is working. And again, this is talking about 4 separate categories, hundreds of thousands of records, and here we are. And so we've got all the companies here listed, and we can, look at all these, and we can, look at Google, for instance, and how much of them are coming from Motorola, for instance. And Alibaba and Intel, there was Intel that we talked about, and Samsung has jumped up recently, and so on. So there's an enormous amount of information that I can get here. And then of course we've got all these other areas that we can look at over on this side, including the keyword, which I think is really pretty cool too. If I come over here to this clustering, again, because it's broken out by category, I can look and say, well, okay, which keywords are unique to each of these, and which ones are shared across them. And so with hundreds of thousands of records broken up into lots of different categories, I can drill into these and I can look at each one of them and find out what's similar about them and what's different about them. And then of course, like I said, one of my other favorite things is to look at the years. And so again, just clicking just takes a few seconds. And here we go. This is our comparison over time. And you can see which of these ones. Here we go. Let's move that over a little bit. And you can see that the computer security continues to rocket. We're almost done with 2020, and so this is almost a full year. We're not seeing the same sort of drop off we would get for a portion of a year. And we're seeing the network security seems to be leveling off or dropping off a little bit. And same thing with encryption, and the same thing with wireless security. And so we're seeing that it's this computer security section that's driving most of the growth that we're seeing in this particular area over the last few years. And so, like I said, that's really phenomenal. I can't say enough about how powerful this is. And one last thing that I want to do here is take us back to that broad query. This is looking at them in categories, but if I wanted to look at them all together again, I can just bring up this one, and here we go. And now I can look at all of the different additional items here, including my dashboard. And my dashboard now, shows all the key jurisdictions overall. It's telling us some of the same information, but here we are now with Huawei and Samsung, joining the groups of the primary assignees when you look at it overall, and the worldwide activity and the application status and inventor activity, and just an amazing amount of information that's just simply a click away. Now I'll tell you a little something here. This is, you remember when I went back and I filled in all those areas with all the highlighting? This is where I got a lot of that. So, you start the landscape, you put together the collection, you start exploring, you start finding out about companies, you start finding about what sort of words I might be interested in redeveloping my search with, or I might want to create highlighting from, in order to then be able to look at those records individually and see which aspect each record has, so that I can then tag it and put it in a tree. Error, no, there it is. If that's the only demo daemon we get for the entire day, we will have been blessed indeed. It's Christmas, so let's celebrate. All righty, that's enough with analytics. So I'm going to come back here to PatBase. Well, actually, I think what I'll do is I'm going to jump right on over to IP share. I showed you before that it's straightforward. I can send things to IP share, and you keep in mind as we're talking about all of the different things that information professionals are asked to do. We're asked to do landscape reports. We're asked to archive and tag things. We're asked to create an environment where our teams can share information about individual documents. Now we know that of course in a PatBase record we can see the entire family. It's listed along the. Let's just view one here for a second. And I've got mine set to 50 at a time, so or it's 25. But this that particular one, the family is not terribly large. But I can flip this and go back to an earlier record. Here you go. And that wasn't too bad. And this is a really big family. Okay, there's a lot going on here. And we know that those records can be different. The claims, for instance, between a number of US records can be different from one another. So when it comes time to get into that detailed examination of individual documents, that's what IP share is for. And what I did is I brought in a few of the IBM documents here, and you can see what I was able to do. These are all part of those three families. And so you've got the online banking, secure online banking, you've got the blockchain with the hashes, you've got a variety of different documents that I've brought in. And for each one of these, there's a lot of things that I can do, like adding these labels again, and I can add, I can vote on it on these. I can look at the original PDF. I can get the family legal status. I've got all the drawings. I can look at each of the individual claims. So this is the nuts and bolts. When this, and of course, you can create users and groups, and everybody can collaborate here. And once again, I'm known for analytics, all right, and I've made my career on creating lots of pretty pictures that people find insightful. But every time I work with a client and every time I've worked with a company, my number one message to them is, look, don't concentrate on the icing. Don't concentrate on dessert. I'm really good at being a pastry chef and putting together a really beautiful dessert. But you got to eat. You got to have the main meal first. You got to be able to. You got to have that plate that's got those proteins and those green vegetables, and it's got the entire nutritiousness of a full meal. What would we be like if all we did was have dessert all the time? We got to fill our plates with other things that are going to fill our bellies and feed our bodies that aren't just sweets. And that's where this all comes in. And so I don't talk about it all that often, but when it comes right down to it, and I'm talking to people about, well, how do you really be successful in IP management? That's this stuff. It's the IP shares of the world. It's the Pat Docs of the world. It's the KMs of the world. It's all of this other information that you can pull together and work with in order to provide this breadth and depth of insight and knowledge across the entire collection of documents at a variety of different levels. So IP share is really cool. I think it's very interesting and has a lot of fascinating things you can do. And then the last one that I'm going to talk about for today is Pat Docs, which of course is primarily used for ordering patent copies. And so it's really, really great for that. But I've actually found that one of my favorite things, there's two of my favorite things, I've got them queued up here. One is the tree. This is a pretty spiffy family tree. And this is one that's got a fair number of members in it, a variety of different provisionals that were filed in a variety of different countries, and a couple of different US ones, and a WO that's splintering off into a variety of other ones. And I can see the national stage entries, and I can see all of the different information about each one of these here in one really nice picture. And so, that long list of patent numbers that we saw in PatBase, that's great, but being able to put this sort of a visual behind it, can be really helpful. And then, as I mentioned, I can come over here to the legal information browser, And that, back from here, for instance, was just, just click the button. And again, so again, I've got it queued up just so that, we don't spend a lot of time. It wouldn't have taken a lot of time, but still. And there's all sorts of really great information here. Now, in this particular case, there isn't any litigation information for this particular one, but if there had been, that would be here. I've got this great timeline that I can look at, and I can get an amazing amount of information about how all of these have progressed and what sort of events have taken place. I mean, this is a ton of detailed information. And then, of course, I can come over here and I can look at the table. So that pops right up with all the relevant information that's there. I can look at the reassignments. And so if any of these have been, reassignments involving Lenovo, for instance, and the IBM, which, kind of brought it up in the first place. So all sorts of really interesting things that are happening here. And then this priority map. So there's a lot of interesting information that's available here as well. And so at this point, I'm going to come back over here to Pat Base, and I'm going to view my history. And those were the things that I wanted to cover. There's one other aspect within Pat Docs that I also really like, and that's the idea of setting up alerts. So if I want to know, for instance, as things happen, as things change in pair, I can see that, and I can get alerted to that if something. So if I've set up these documents, there's some that are pending in the U.S., and I want to know the second that they grant in the U.S. or they grant in Europe for an opposition or anything else. I can set that up really easily, and now I can keep track of those things, and my team can know that hey, we've been keeping an eye on this, but now it's gone from being theoretical, it's gone from being something that could be an issue to something that now we're probably going to have to be a little bit more active on thinking about and doing something about because it has actually gone on to grant. And with that, we are at 40 after. We've left time for questions. We didn't necessarily intend to take the entire hour per se, but happy to go through any questions and dive deeper into any one of these individual items. And with that, I will ask Ken if we have questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Tony. We do have a couple questions. For starters, around the hierarchy in PAC-KM. We have a couple of questions around organizing the hierarchies, especially in the technology area, as well as how many levels you would go within a technology tagging. And then if you could talk a little bit about if any reorganization is needed for labels that have placed and maybe have changed.
Okay, great questions. So what I'll do here is I'm showing it here, and again, this is just a mock-up, but I'll share with you my experience working with clients, and that is that it really depends. The deepest I've ever gone on a tag is 4 levels in. So for instance, if you've got a level 1 that's materials, and then you've got a level 2 that's a certain type of material, then you might in fact have a level 3 and even then a level 4 that talks about very specific aspects of that particular material. In my experience, that's always driven by the business because those are the sorts of questions they want to have answered quickly by doing it that way, or it's driven by the volume of records. And so once I get a certain number of tags in a particular area, it's about time to start thinking about, well, maybe we should create some additional branches off that one. And so, for instance, I've got somebody that I'm working with currently, and they entered a new business, and all of a sudden, they've got this primary business that's interested in one thing, and they've decided that we're interested in this other item as well, and there wasn't any coverage. Well, in that case, we had a little powwow. The R&D folks got together with the patent folks. They got together with the attorneys, and I joined in to help facilitate. And we said, all right, so let's talk about redesigning the branches of this tree. And I'd say that it's a good idea to do that maybe every year, every 2 years, just to make sure that things are staying fresh. Now, I would not get rid of branches because those are legacy. And so you never know when you might need to go back and revisit something that was a few years old, 4, 5, 6 years old. So you don't want to lose that. But you can always build on it. And once again, there was a particular example where there's a sort of catch-all category, and all of a sudden we found out, well, we're getting a lot of documents in the catch-all, and getting a lot of documents in that catch-all category isn't very helpful. So let's get together and figure out how to subcategorize the catch-all, and then maybe create some additional subcategories besides those that get into some additional details that are going to be useful to the business. And so that's that. It's always about the business. It's always about the R&D people. It's always about the patent attorneys. It's always about our clients and what they need to do and what the information they need to be able to find quickly. And so that's how I approach looking and building these trees and revisiting them every once in a while.
Excellent, thank you. And can you tell us a little bit about if there's overlap amongst different technology branches here? Is that something you'd look to address, and how would the system handle if there was
well, that's the nice thing about this system. This particular system, for instance, notice how many of these involve key management. So there's keys involved with secure payments. There's keys that are involved with network security. There are keys involved in encryption, and there's keys that are involved with wireless. Those are all different keys. Okay, and so on the one hand, you could say, well, I'm going to go ahead and just say key management, and that's going to be a high-level category, and then I'm going to create subcategories for each of these, and maybe as far as the form is concerned, there's something down here that certain big-ticket items like key management and blockchain in areas here, but that's the beauty of creating a tree like this, and once you get people who are experienced with looking at the records and looking at the highlighting, for instance, they look at it and say, okay, and let me show you an example, because we can do it quick, because it doesn't take very long. Let's go back, and let's just open up one of these. And so I got my tags, and they show up when I look at the full record as well, and then I can edit my fields. And so it just opens the thing up. And so I gotta be honest, I mean, I have a client that I do this every week, and I do this with 400 or 500 records every week. And I've got a system that I go through to make sure that I kind of separate the wheat from the chaff. But then when I've got the stuff that I think that I really want to focus on and look at more deeply, then I go through and I'll maybe look at the full text, and then I'll look at the highlighting that I've got here. And eventually I'll say, yeah, you know what, this belongs in the database. And so then I'll go ahead and open this up, and I've got the whole thing laid out in front of me. And I just go, okay, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one. It's a Chinese menu. I'm ordering dim sum, or maybe sushi is a better example. So I'll have one of these California rolls, and I'll have this Tagagago, and then I'll have some whitefish, and then at the end, I'm going to put a company on it. And so I can do that pretty easily. And once you get accustomed to working with the system, these go pretty fast. That you glance at them and you say, okay, bye-bye. Okay, so that would be my response to that. That's the way I generally look at this.
And would you recommend, or how would you handle different business units? Would you have separate categories for them?
Yeah, actually, that's another great question. And so, for instance, this is a single tree. But in this particular system, if you have different business segments, you can have a bar up here that says segment, for instance, and you can segregate those segments. So like the P&G example, you can have the laundry segment, you can have the personal care segment, you can have the pharmaceutical segment, you can have the diaper segment, you can have the paper towel segment, and you can have all those things subdivided into segments up here, and then they each have their own individual trees. And so again, for one of my clients, they're a global multinational Fortune 500 company, and they've got all these different business units. and each business unit has its own tree and its own priorities. And then when it comes time to look at a record, sometimes I look at a record that I found in one alert and say, well, wait a second, that doesn't really belong in the alert I found it in, but that's works really well for these other guys over in this other segment. So I can just use, if I'm an administrator and I have access to all the portions of the archive, I can go ahead and change segments and go ahead and just tag it for that segment instead, or tag it for more than one segment, which I've also done.
And would you bulk upload if you were tagging for multiple segments?
Maybe. That's bulk upload is useful, but it's very specific. And so with this level of integration or this level of detail, it would be because the real beauty in these is that you've got a unique fingerprint almost document for document. It's not all that common necessarily if you've got a detailed enough tree that two records are going to have the same fingerprint, that they're going to have the same characteristics. And the bulk upload works great if you weren't necessarily, if you're going to say these are all from one company. Like, I'll be perfectly honest. I mean, if I go ahead and just say, what did I do? If I unclick network security, okay, and I go ahead and just search for IBM, letting you behind the screen here, 667. I didn't tag 667 of these. This was done with a bulk upload. And so if I knew that there were a particular company in a particular area with a particular subcategory, and I could certainly save myself a lot of time by just bulk uploading those records. And what's nice about it is if something changes, you can do a bulk upload that doesn't overwrite the existing record. It'll go ahead and add the new tags, but it won't overwrite the old ones, which comes in really handy when it comes time to maybe add, so for instance, remember I told you before about that catch-all category. And so I find all the catch-all documents, I figure out either by a search or by classification codes or by some mechanism that this subcategory is going to be a sub-branch of that catch-all category. Now I can go ahead and get them done all at once. So that's an excellent example that if I had to go back and create additional subcategories under a category that was just sort of flat before, I could easily do that by taking advantage of that feature.
Excellent, thank you. And shifting to IP share, there's some questions around the reporting and how you would share information with your clients or share that information. Would that be done within IP share, or would that be done with an export or an output report of some kind?
I think you can do both ways. I mean, there's a very clear share button here, but I think with a tool like IP share, it's got collaboration right in the name. The more that you can draw people into a system like this in order to be able to take advantage of all of the, email is great. Excel spreadsheets are fine. Lots of people share information in lots of different databases in lots of different ways. But it's difficult to imagine being able to build a custom system that is quite so feature rich, that has all the images, for instance, that it has the labels already there, that it has access to the family status and the legal status and the original PDF. It's got the scoring on here. So my philosophy is, generally speaking, to draw people into the system that was designed to help them with this specific task or this specific part of their job that they need to get done. And so that's why, like with PACAM, and the companies I work with who have the archive get a lot of use out of it because it was designed to do what they needed to do. It was designed to be very practical and very much driven by their workflow and the way their business runs. And so IP share, I think, is something very similar to that. That the way you set up your projects, the way you set up your users and groups, the way you set up your tags, is just all those sorts of things that you put together, that infrastructure, that scaffolding, that help keep everything straight. because otherwise all this starts to run together and you get very confused after a while.
Excellent. Thank you, Tony. That looks like we've covered the bulk of the questions. Any additional questions, please feel free to submit them in the questions, and we'll follow up with any that we didn't get to today. Additionally, feel free to always email us at support@mindsoft.com with any questions or any follow-up that you'd like, as well as there will be a recording made available of today's session, and that will be emailed to all of the attendees. And then we'll be following up if you have any additional questions, or if you'd like to speak to Tony directly, we can arrange that as well. Thank you again, Tony. Great job, and we greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. You're spending an hour of your time. And yes, absolutely. If there's any additional questions, or if I can be of assistance, or I know that the Mindsoft people are very responsive. But thank you so much. Happy holidays. And thank you again.